Good afternoon, everybody. Marty Richards here with Richland Center Tourism. And we are finally bringing you actually our Wednesday, why do we call it that? Had a little technical difficulty yesterday. However, we're back at it and back in action. So today you get a little bonus episode. And I wasn't joking when I said, hey, this is a really special episode because there's some pretty cool stuff in this particular episode. Today, we are on location at Pier Spring Drive. And Pier Spring Drive, this episode isn't so much about why we call it that. The real story is about something that happened actually in the not too distant past in 1988. So first I'll give you the why do we call it that, but then I'm going to give you just like Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story. So first off, the namesake for Pier Spring Road or Pier Spring Drive really deserves their own episode, and they will get that. So William Henry Pier and his family came from Ohio in the late 1800s and were very instrumental in settling the area. The Pier family really owned a lot of lands in the area. Also, they were really the forefathers of what we now know as the Richland County Bank. So they, again, as you can tell, very instrumental, did a lot of very important things to really get the community going and owned quite a few lands. The land in this area, much of it was owned by the Pier family, so that's where we get Pier from. Then also Springs, because along this roadway, it's really a really cool drive, very picturesque, very, very abundant with springs and nice areas. And so in the early 1900s, and then with the advent of the automobile, it was very common that residents in the area and even visitors would come along this stretch of road and along the springs would have picnics. So it wasn't, crazy to see quite a few different people out here on a Sunday afternoon having a picnic along some of the springs, and there were common gathering points. So that's why we call it Pier Spring Drive. Now, what's really interesting about this area, and first off, I got to thank Richard Dieter again. Richard is kind of my savant, where he kind of sends me a little coded message about, hey, go check this out. He doesn't really tell me what's happening, but he gives me a little clue, and then I have to go figure it out. But thank you, Richard, for the lead on this story. And then also the Richland County History Room does a really nice job with all of their resources. So thank you to Crystal Foley and all of your help. So we're now stepping back to March of 1988. And in March of 1988, there's a really interesting occurrence that happens. And that is a couple of individuals, a father and son team, known by Joseph Salter and his son Joseph Salter III, are traveling from North Dakota as Joseph Salter, the senior, is a professor at North Dakota University. They're traveling from North Dakota to New Orleans. I know this is not exactly a straight line to get from North Dakota to New Orleans, but they're headed there because Joseph Salter, the professor, is going to present a paper that he had written about the civil rights unrest of the 60s, and he was instrumental in that. He was very involved in the civil rights fight back in the 60s in the South, and so a very well-known man. But they were headed there. He was going to present a paper at a convention, and it was the American Popular Culture Convention. He was going to present this paper that he had written. So they depart from North Dakota. They head towards Cedar Rapids, Iowa first. Well, that wasn't crazy because they could have been headed to Cedar Rapids because Mr. Salter or Professor Salter had previously taught at Coe College. Well, then they head there, but when they get to Cedar Rapids or just outside, they decide, let's take a detour around Cedar Rapids so we don't hit the traffic. Well, among a few bad turns and misdirection, they actually end up in La Crosse, Wisconsin. In La Crosse, they stop, gather their bearings again, fill up with gas, and then they head back out, realizing, okay, we're not going to Cedar Rapids, let's get to New Orleans. They're attempting to head towards Bettendorf, Iowa, where they're going to spend the evening. As they head southeast on Highway 14, they're not really heading to Bettendorf, Iowa again yet, and they talk about struggling with really their direction and understanding what's happening to them at that moment. Then the last recollection that they clearly have, they know they went through Coon Valley, Wisconsin, and then headed up Bashford Hill, which is just behind me actually, about 3/4 of a mile. On Bashford Hill, they begin to fall into again, we always wave, they begin to fall into what they describe as a sense of amnesia. They really don't recall. It's 6:25 p.m., sun is setting at that point. It's March of 1988. They don't really recall a little over the next hour. They essentially remember going up Bashford Hill, and then everything at that point is a blank for some time. Well, at 7:45, they then become aware that they are driving out this road, County Highway Z, towards State Highway 14. They turn right on State Highway 14. They're continuing now to head southeast, and they really are disoriented. It isn't until they drive through Richland Center, hit State Highway 58, that they stop, get the map out, consult with where they're at, what's going on. They're still disoriented, but they do see on the map, okay, we need to head down State Highway 80 and head towards Iowa to get to Bettendorf, Iowa. They do, they regroup. They get to Bettendorf, Iowa that night. They sleep overnight. They do discuss a little bit, but they realize, both of them cannot recall that time frame from 6:25 p.m. to 7:45 p.m. They continue on, go to the convention in New Orleans, make it there without episode, go back to North Dakota, everything's cool. The son heads to California, where he is actually living. He's in his early 20s and kind of setting out on his own. It isn't until a couple of months later that they start conversing, and Professor Salter kind of starts writing down his recollections, that they realize that they start to fill in the missing gaps of time. As the story goes, what happened? As their recollection comes back and they start to be able to consult, and what's notable about it is they weren't really doing this together. They were kind of, writing this down separate, and were starting to tell other people about it separately. But they went down Bashford Hill on State Highway 14 behind me, hit Pier Spring Drive, turned up Pier Spring Drive, and their recollection was that as they were driving up in their truck, they came upon a flying saucer or a spaceship of some sort. And at that point, some humanoid creatures actually took them inside the spaceship, did some scanning and some scientific studies of them. They recall that it was a very pleasant experience, that everybody was quite nice, there was no threat. It appeared that everybody was actually quite pleasant and welcoming. This goes on during this missing period of time, and then they're dismissed and allowed to leave. They leave the spaceship, they get back on their truck, drive, and then that's where they kind of fill in the missing pieces, that they then end up right here on County Highway Z, heading back out to 14, and then go back and kind of get back on their way. This probably would really be a story that no one would believe if it weren't for Professor Salter's standing. He was a very well-respected professor. He had been very important in the American civil rights fight in the South. He was a respected professor of cultural affairs at North Dakota University. Also then, several newspapers started to report this, and it actually made a little bit of national news. Also, what's notable is that because his son was in California and was actually starting to recall this to other people without them kind of collaborating and filling it in together, they actually were able to fill in the missing pieces separate and independent of each other. So I guess the thing to take from the story is, number one, apparently if you do see any unidentified flying objects in the area, that may not be uncommon, because it has happened before. Secondly, it was really known as a very nice picnic area back in the 1900s, and even in 1988, visitors came from a long ways away. That was another side bit. They said that they were told that the visitors here came from the Zeta, the Zeta galaxy, and so that's the rest of the story. But it was well reported at the time, or later on, and even Professor Salter did go on to teach classes at North Dakota University about close encounters, unidentified flying objects, things of that sort. All of that starting right here on Pier Spring Drive. So that's why we call it Pier Spring Drive, but also maybe an episode of Did That Really Happen? So just for those of you out there to contemplate and kind of wonder about. As you notice, we have a lot of folks travel along this area on the UTV trail. Some great scenery out here up on top of the hill. We're not very far from Dayton Corners. We'll have to do a little story on how Dayton got its name as well soon. So we really appreciate it when you share our videos. Hope you enjoyed this one. This one was a little bit of a one-off, but kind of exciting. If you have comments, thoughts, feel free to share. We also appreciate when you do share the videos. We're getting excited as spring is coming. Trout season's going to be coming, and we are looking forward to all the activities that a nice warm spring brings. You can even hear the robins in the background, hopefully. So for Richland Center Tourism, I'm Marty Richards. Everybody have a great day.